To me, spirit is rooted in states of consciousness or states of awareness. And this isn't like hoodoo voodoo. It's phenomenology, the science of subjective experience. And there are three primary states of consciousness: the gross, subtle, and causal, which are usually associated with their three closest counterparts: waking, sleeping, and dreaming. Further than that, spirit is my ability to appreciate reality and life. And let's start this with a story. There was a big bang, and basically that brought everything to the present. And for your own life, you started off as a sperm from your father and an egg from your mother, and you beat a million, billion, gajillion other sperm to fertilize that one egg. And then you were conceived, a single cell zygote. That was you. And this zygote multiplied 2 cells, 3 cells, 9 cells, 100 cells, until pretty soon it had arms and legs and a head and a tongue to speak and a nervous system, and finally you were born. And now that you're here, take a look at your hands. And if you look a bit deeper at any place, you'll see that your collection of 50 trillion cells, 20 trillion atoms in each cell, 1,000 trillion atoms, and when you look super closely, even deeper than that, at the atoms, you'll see it's just energy. And at the point of the Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago, everything in the universe was pure energy. Human being is a very complex pattern of energy. Now, I look motionless, and I'm moving the speed of light, and I'm the age of the entire universe. Now, take 10 seconds to think about what you're going to do tomorrow. About 10. You just did something no other organism on the planet can do. You just created an alternate reality. Now, take 10 seconds to stop thinking. You can't. Now, this creates a whole new class of human suffering, like jealousy, regret, hope, stress, which no other organism will feel either. When you go to a movie, you totally forget you're in the movie. Then all the lights go on and you're shocked back into reality. Think about it, something like Socrates' or Plato's cave. Subjective experience of color, etc. All of these things happen inside your own head, inside your own consciousness. And when you stop focusing on what's outside and you start focusing on what's inside, how all of that is being created in there. And just like a fish may never realize that it's swimming in water, not all human beings with consciousness can actually fully experience their experience of consciousness. We're not a human being with consciousness, but consciousness which has a human being. Now, there's a lot of other thoughts around this idea, like, for example, a wave is a separate entity in the ocean, but it also is the ocean. It's not separate from it. If we can look at thoughts objectively, we can transcend pure subjectivity into absolute being. It's crazy. Now, there are lots of practices that have been practiced for years of doing this. There's the neti approach. I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. But knowing who you truly are is an insight. Experiencing who you are is an awakening. Solving this problem is to awaken. To awaken is to realize I am not this me. From there, I can basically do higher level work in order to train my ego, which I can use as opposed to be used by. This is a part and whole perspective. Every whole is a part of a greater whole, and every whole is made up of parts. When I realize that I am not me, I'm not this ego, then I don't need to hold my 1,000 trillion atoms together, because I'm not separate from the pure energy and consciousness that I come from. Body and mind are just temporary manifestations of energy. I can accept the death of my body and mind, which opens a vast amount of possibility. The voice that says I have to do certain things to be fulfilled loses its power, and everything in life becomes a game. It becomes fun, it becomes play, and we all experience basically what we experienced when we were young and built sandcastles just for fun and, let them be taken by the sea before we learned how to fully plan. Now, close your hand into a fist. Most people think that they're this. Then they realize that they're kind of this. They got all these parts going on. There's things that can happen. Then they realize that there's this. Oh God, it gets a little bit confusing. And then finally, if they make it that far, they realize that they're this. Open completely. When I'm open and have awakened to the big self and can objectively look at the little self, then everything is possible. Now, you don't need to be religious. You don't need to believe in God. You don't have to walk on your knees for miles in the desert or fast for 30 days. You just have to be intelligent. You just have to choose, in the famous words of Einstein, one of two ways to live your life, as if everything is a miracle or as if nothing is. Spirit is the power to elevate human experience. A cadaver rests on the steel table of a morgue. Same flesh, same blood, and yet the spirit is gone. Spirit is life. It's the difference between staring into a fuzzy clock in the face of a puppy. See, I was a philosopher for years at school, and I thought faith and New Age spirituality was just a load of BS. And frankly, that was because I thought it was disempowering. I wanted the people to own their own self and take charge of their own life. And I had a hard time with this idea of spirit. That was at least during a phase. And during this phase, I was a radical atheist and I ran the philosophy club. And I invited a man who's a very prominent priest in order to talk about science versus religion. And beforehand, I sent everybody in the club a list of these 32 proofs against the existence of God. I wanted us armed and ready to go, not because I wanted to hurt this man, but I wanted to fully learn. I wanted to really push him against the sharp irons of our minds in order to see whether or not his wisdom could stand the test of our scrutiny. And it did. This was almost a life-changing moment in my life where essentially by the end of it, he forced me to consider two things. The first was, do we have a metaphysical need as human beings? And the answer to that in my mind was obviously, clearly yes. Every culture throughout all time, regardless of its origin and where it came from or where it started on the planet, all had some sort of spirit in their life. They all had rituals. They all believed in higher powers and different powers and something larger than themselves. Now, the second part of it was, if all spiritual figures or people that represented spirit as a thing or practice, a theory, whatever you want to call it, were positive role models to us that truly practiced what they preached, would I have such a bad taste in my mouth about it? And what that really forced me to think about was how my own thoughts about a subject were completely influenced by bad teachers of it. Now, all it takes is one bad math teacher to ruin math completely. Some of you might have experienced that. And one bad English teacher to take the fun out of reading. But this really kind of got my brain thinking about what's possible for spirit and how to think about it. And how to think about ritual, for example. So think about the best birthday you remember growing up. Think about it. Really go back there. Imagine blowing out the candles. Who's around you? How do you feel? What do you smell? How'd the cake taste? Now, for every other person on the planet, this may have just been another day, another ordinary day. But to you and your friends and your family, there was a real ritual there. The day was spiritually elevated with the significance of worshiping you. There was nothing religious about it, nothing mystical, nothing weird. It was uniquely human. Elevating that day was a spiritual act. It was a truly spiritual act. It was metaphysical. It was a proverbial rain dance around a secular custom. It was an alchemy we all agreed to participate in, or at least the people you were with, an alchemy to affect the quality of the day. For that is the highest among all arts. I don't know one skeptic who doesn't like to be celebrated on their birthday. Dismissing humanistic celebrations isn't being rational. It's being Ebenezer Scrooge. It's another level. You see, we all have this metaphysical need. It's not childish. It's not archaic. It's not ignorant. It's quite possibly the most precious part about what makes us human and capable of marveling at the sublime mystery of life. In Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, the chorus to man starts with the beautiful phrase, anthropo danteron peli. I'm sorry, my ancient Greek is not too good. But it basically means man is the most terrible and awesome of all the creatures. Terrible and awesome because in the Greek tradition, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and instilled in humanity the demiurgic power to God, generate, organize, and destroy. And as science marches towards an increasingly elaborate picture of the world, where quantum physics, quantum entanglement, and the multiverse continue to develop with their spooky corollaries as the rules of our reality, and where Wallace Stevens' words continue to ring true that God and the imagination are one, in the most optimistic vision of the phrase, perhaps it's safe to say we haven't fully comprehended or harnessed the supreme power of the human spirit yet. Spirit in nature. Spirit in nature is experiencing the sublime. It's the ability to call the world blue like an orange or to cuddle a dog like it's your best friend. It's the ability to look at a double rainbow, double rainbow all the way, and cry with joy and put it in a video that brings joy to 43 million people around the world. And if you don't like any of that, let me give you something else from the scientific literature that blew my mind. My first class at USC on health, happiness, and well-being took a study from HeartMath, which was studying the EMF field created by the heart, how the heart has its own nervous system, almost separate from the head, that literally can be in or out of congruence with what's going on within your brain, the brain waves that you're creating. Now, this isn't just relevant for ourselves, it's relevant for everyone around us and the people that we touch. For example, you put one person in a certain state next to a cat, and the cat will entrain to the state of that same person. It's sort of like I forget what they're called, but those I think they're called Newton balls, where like you lift one, you drop it hits the other, and they go like this forever. Or if you put two metronomes side by side out of sync, eventually they will sync up and they will train to each other's patterns. Now, that's all well and good, but what's the practical application? Well, this blew my mind. Literally, at UC San Diego, in medical school, since they had recently changed the national board exams where people had to be in a room with a patient and they didn't want to just pass doctors who knew all the answers but couldn't relate to another human being and build rapport, they basically added a part to the test where they had to pass a real examination, or potential doctors, had to pass a real examination with a patient. Now, in order to train for this, what UC San Diego was doing was they had a program where these medical students would get in a pen with a horse and literally change their HeartMath brain and heart variability patterns in order to entrain to the horse, because a horse lacks a prefrontal cortex, so it responds to people in exactly the way that it feels. So when somebody stepped into the pen with a horse out of an incoherent state where their heart and their brain were not matched up and synchronous, essentially the horse would not come close to them. They were repelled from them like two of the same sides of a magnet touching. And what happened? Well, essentially people could train in order to entrain their own heart and brain waves. And literally the horses at that point would follow them. Now, what does this mean? Well, it means that vibes, energy, auras, maybe supernatural, spiritual ideas, but they're phenomena that are completely measurable. And Phenomena that by knowing about them, I can not only affect my life, but other people's lives. Now, whenever I've cringed at stuff like this, I had to ask myself, am I skeptical because this is untrue, or because I have a charge with the way some of the people act who generally believe this stuff? Now, as a guide, I only care about what works. Now, why or how exactly it worked and what else could work are important questions, but they're not always the most relevant. So there's a healer that I see and who's changed my life and the life of many people around me in my world. And one of the best stories that I have of him, and it was during the time that I was most skeptical about healing or whatever, was literally a woman came to see him who had edema swelling in her leg and needed to have her leg amputated on a Friday. And she literally came to my house to see him on a Tuesday, and she couldn't even walk to the front door. In 15 seconds, she was up and walking to the front door, sitting on the couch. 15 minutes, she was up and dancing and moving her body full of joy, and she canceled her surgery that Friday. And I thought to myself, okay, cool. We'll give her a month. If she needs to have her freaking leg cut off, then it's going to happen. You know, we'll give it another month. We'll see what happens. 6 months go by, she's totally fine. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, fine. We'll give her a year and we'll see what happens. A year goes by, she's totally fine. It's been over 3 years now, and she still has her leg that she was supposed to have had amputated that Friday. And what did he do? He didn't touch her. He literally just snapped his fingers and went like this. Now, why did that work? Who cares? She has her freaking leg. I mean, things like that are amazing, and you know, I'll do my best to try to explain things and understand things and why apples fall from trees, but dropping apples and explaining gravitational forces are two very different objectives and two very different things. It's easy to make an apple fall. It's difficult to correctly explain why it's falling. And if we have to explain correctly why an apple falls every time we want to drop something to the ground, we're going to have a lot of issues. So, unfortunately, and this has been true for me many times in my life, when destiny points its fingers, some people just sit there and suck on the tip of it. Now, I've seen amazingly unfathomable things, and I've stopped worrying so much, at least in my own life, about what to believe in, because let's face it, beliefs change anyways. The earth was flat and now it's round. It was the center of the universe and now it's the sun. I've learned the hard way that being too smart is too stupid anyway. So I'll give you a quick little funny story about this. There was a great professor on a boat that was giving amazing lectures, and an old sailor who would watch these lectures every night. And one day the old sailor finally went up to him and said, "Oh, Professor, I loved your lecture today. It was so amazing. It was beautiful." And the professor says, "Well, have you ever studied geology?" And the old sailor says, "Oh, well, no, I've never studied geology." And the professor says, "Well, then you've wasted 1/4 of your life." The next day, the sailor comes back and listens to this great lecture by the professor and eagerly approaches him afterwards and says, Professor, that was an amazing lecture today." And the professor says to him, "Well, great, old sailor, have you ever studied oceanography?" And the sailor says, "Well, no, I've never studied oceanography. I'm a simple man, no education." And the professor turns to him, tisk tisk, and says, "Half your life has been wasted." And the old man goes home feeling so bad, or back to his bunk at least. The next day, the sailor goes back and listens to that great lecture again. And the lecturer says afterwards, when they're speaking, "Have you ever studied meteorology?" And the sailor says, "Oh, no, what is that? What's meteorology?" And the professor says, "Well, that's the study of the wind and weather." And the sailor goes, "Oh, no, I don't know anything about that." And the professor says, "Well, then 3/4 of your life have been wasted." And the sailor feels so sad. The next day, the old sailor comes back to the professor this time with a huge grin on his face. Professor, professor, have you ever studied swimology? And the professor thinks for a moment, swimology, no, I don't think I've ever studied swimology. What is that? And the sailor says, well, it's the practice of swimming. And the professor goes, oh, no, I've read a lot about swimming and oceanography and meteorology and geology, but I don't know how to swim. Forget that. And the sailor says to him, well, I'm afraid, sir, then all your life has been wasted because this ship is sinking and there are no life rafts. We'll all have to swim to shore. So I hope you enjoyed that little one, and we're going to move on to social contribution, our final pillar